Spent too much time in California. Now I got that Rona. Gotta be alone. Staring at my phone. Gotta be alone.
Gotta be alone.
Hey, welcome back to the thealoneaviruspodcast. This is it. Took last week off because it did not feel right to do a podcast, and who the fuck cares what I have to say, with everything that's going on. And, I decided to come back and do this one, but I don't know if I'll continue. For many reasons. One is, this is a podcast about life during this pandemic, essentially. And, I didn't think there was anything that would be able to take my mind off of that until the pandemic was over. So I was wrong about that. Things have happened that have taken my mind off of it and become the number one slot in my brain and most people's brains, and for good reason, but very much unforeseen, but also not. But it's an unusual time. So I don't know if there's room for this podcast or my voice right now. But I did have this podcast planned, so we went through with it, and I think it's really good. And it's with my friend Ryan, who works. He's a reporter. He's a journalist. He works for the Wall Street Journal, and so he has a very interesting perspective on the news and the media and how that's been handling the pandemic. And we talk about other things that are going on, if it matters from us, if our perspective matters, is what I mean. It matters. It matters. Black lives matter. It matters. But I'm saying I don't know if our words necessarily matter. But if you're hearing this and you didn't realize that, then good thing you're here, right? And there's a million metaphors for this at this point, and if you don't get it, probably not gonna get it. But if you say all lives matter, you are either ignorant to the issue or you're just overtly racist. There are worse things you could say, I guess, if you're overtly racist, but you could be trying to be sly. But anyway, I think the point is trying to reach maybe just the ignorant people at this time, so that the overt asshole racists could lose their power and laughed out of the room. And I guess the idea is we need to build a room in which they will be laughed out of. A world in which those people have no power or say, and they're always going to exist, but the fact that they have power and people listen to them and they have a voice and they might be the president, is what is really the problem. So, that's what needs to change. And if someone comes up to you, maybe your wife or your partner or your spouse or your husband or your girlfriend, your boyfriend, says, I love you, and you say, I love everyone. You're hoping that, the message is in there somewhere, right? That's kind of what all lives matter is. You're like, yeah, I agree with you, the message is in there, don't you get it? No. You need to take this point in time and focus on the work that actually has to be done and reach a critical mass so that shit changes. And you need to actually focus your attention on that thing at this time. Saying I love everyone is pretty fucking evasive at best. At best, it's a very terrible way of conveying your message, right? At worst, it's overtly destructive and shitty. So if you needed to hear that, then I'm glad that you did. It's raining hard now. So thanks for joining me for this episode of the Thealoneavirus podcast. My friend Ryan, he's a very thoughtful and kind man, and I've known him for almost my whole life. So yeah, check out the episode and let me know what you think. Might not hear from me in this format for a while, but maybe you will. I don't know. Okay. Two heads. Cool. All right. Thanks, Ryan, for being here. This is the Thealoneavirus podcast. Here with one of my very good friends, Ryan. Ryan is a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Is that right? Did I get that right?
You did.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is fun, and it's also nice to see friends.
Yeah, man, absolutely. It's great to see your face.
Yeah.
I know we catch up on some group Zoom calls sometimes, but we don't get to hash it out one-on-one.
I know. I was thinking that today, like, and we'll just put this out there, like, so I've known you for since probably 5th grade.
Sounds about right.
So that's a long time, and we are sometimes indirectly, but we are in constant communication. Like, we've had a group text that's been going on for, like, I would say 3 years, something like that.
Yeah, how long has it been? I don't know. It's the amount of activity is really kind of insane.
Right.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's rare that you and I get. What's that?
There's just way too many texts.
There's way too many texts. I agree. And now there's like multiple threads within the group. It's crazy. But the point is that it's rare that you and I get to speak one-on-one these days.
Yes.
So this is it's a nice little way to be able to do that. And you know, I didn't put out a podcast this week because I just felt really weird. I don't think anybody's missing it, to be honest. I don't think there's anybody out there like, where's the Thealoneavirus podcast? But I for one didn't feel like very creative, but also I just kind of looked at it like nobody really needs to hear my voice right now. And also the past couple of months, the pandemic has been just at the forefront of my mind almost all the time. And then just this past week, it hasn't. And that's not because the pandemic is any less of a concern. It's just that what's going on now has even taken priority beyond that. So it's just been weird. And this is the first podcast I've done in this new social and political climate. So I don't have a great idea of how this is going to go because my thoughts are not very organized, but I'm glad that you're here to join me on this experience.
Isn't it amazing that there is a story or I say story because I'm a journalist, but I guess really a thing happening in the world that seems like a bigger deal than the coronavirus pandemic? Like,
it really is.
Like, could you have comprehended that a few weeks ago that something like that could happen? You know what I mean? Other than like World War III or a nuclear attack or some insane thing, you know, it's like, it's wild.
Yeah, right. There's a pandemic affecting millions of people directly, and then like tens or hundreds of millions more indirectly. And then there's something else that's even more important all of a sudden. That's just like that has taken precedence in my mind, which is like, if you told me that 2 weeks ago, I'd have been like, that doesn't seem possible. You know, like this is just like constant source of anxiety and constant source of thought. And like, I was at the point of like sort of planning my return to real life. And then now it's just like, okay, I have no idea what real life even is right now. But I'll be explicit, like maybe somebody listening to this doesn't know what we're talking about. That seems impossible, but just like the Black Lives Matter and the protests going on literally around the world directly after the murder of George Floyd last week. And that's kind of what everybody's doing, thinking about, talking about on whichever side that they happen to be on. I mean, I'm just coming from a protest myself today. That's the last thing I did today. So,
What's that like?
it was good. It was like heartening, but also scary a little bit at the same time. I'm just, here in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, which is not where we grew up in New Jersey. It's a very different place. It's a small town and it's pretty homogenous. It's not a diverse place. So I I also I'm not that familiar with the people. And so I went into it thinking it would probably be just like a small gathering of like a few people. But it was pretty big. Maybe a couple hundred people. And so that was cool. That was great. And there were speakers and it was pretty moving. And we did like 9 minutes of silence and all that was like very heavy and pretty moving. And then gradually you get people trying to figure out you're there. And then there's dudes that like a coordinated like drive by like these 3 trucks, like pickup trucks with Trump flags, like honking and like stealing focus. And then there's like a bunch of open carry people that just start walking the perimeter because it's in a park with like a path around it. And they're just walking around with their gun on their belt and just like not saying anything, just like intimidating, stealing focus. And then there's people put their cameras in your face, like smile everybody. And I'm just like, I was uncomfortable at a certain point.
Were the people putting cameras in your face seem to be like not there to protest, or do you mean like other protesters filming?
No, people that are like very much like want to get your face on camera for some other reason.
So they have a record of you protest. Man, that's wild.
Yeah, I was just explaining this to Deanie. Are you familiar with like doxing and all that?
Yes.
So I feel like that's what people do to retaliate, like people that are counter protesters. They want to get your face on camera, and then they try to identify people, just like the way people try to identify people in the like violent protests or whatever, or the Charlottesville thing. People were like, who are these dudes? It's like just the same sort of thing. And it's kind of scary because I don't know what that retaliation would look like around here.
Yeah. Wow. That is scary. It makes me think of, as you know, I write about technology policy, and I've written a couple articles about facial recognition technology, which is very good now and fairly widely available, or at least like it seems like it's going to be fairly widely available soon. And having your picture, there's a lot of things that people could then potentially, if they had access to the right technology, could find a lot of other pictures of you, or find other things about you online just from your face. Without knowing your name, without knowing where you live, they might be able to find that out just by taking your picture. So it's like this new world that we live in, right? That I think it's still kind of hard for the average person to get their hands on a facial recognition system like that, but it's like in theory possible. It's definitely a little scary.
Especially if like some people read these protests as being anti-police, like they'll try to get in on the side of police. Like maybe I'm thinking they have more resources than the average person does. I don't know. I mean, I think it's crazy that people read these protests as being strictly anti-police, because I don't think that's the intention.
Yeah, like what were the words that were said by the speakers? Like, what was the intention? What were people talking about?
It's just, I mean, very simply that Black lives matter, and that people shouldn't be targeted and killed because of something out of their control, like their skin color. I mean, maybe not anything at all, but like that's certainly not the reason, if there is one. And I mean, that was the message. It wasn't like fuck police.
The police or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yes, all lives do matter, but obviously you're saying that and they don't to you because you don't value our lives. So how can that be true? It's like both of these things, Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, both of those things should be true, but they're not. And at this point, we can't hold both of those things as truth and at the same time. So, I mean, that's the message. It's like, make this one true so this one can be true.
I heard a professor, a Black professor, talking on the radio the other day, who said Black Lives Matter means Black Lives Matter also. Like, it doesn't mean other lives don't matter. It means, you know, we feel like our lives haven't mattered.
Right.
They do. You know, it's not like exclusive of other lives mattering or something, you know.
Right. It's like, let's put some focus here because it needs it.
Right.
And then I guess the ideal would be like, once everybody recognizes and changes their behavior and we get to this point where Black Lives Matter and that's doesn't need to be said anymore, then we can move on to, oh yeah, all lives do matter. But I don't see
the
that.
lives of, you know, the other sort of more privileged races don't have to necessarily need a movement to like,
oh no,
get that, you know. So I'm asking all the questions though. I should probably let you ask questions. You can tell.
Well, like I said, I don't know. Usually I have a page of notes and questions, and I don't today because I mean, this podcast has been about how the pandemic is affecting people, but now it's like,
yeah,
I don't know how to ask those questions right now. And I feel like I feel like in a little bit of a bind because I don't want to be just like two white guys talking about like racial issues either, because that doesn't feel right. So
yeah, Callie, my wife Callie, said today that she saw an Instagram post where someone said, "I'm muting myself." She was like, "So why are you posting?"
yeah.
I'm posting to say that I'm muting my voice so that others can speak. Well, just don't say anything.
I know. Well, that's very like social media culture anyway. Yeah. It's like, yeah. I mean, that's been just looking at Instagram and stuff the past few days has been kind of crazy too, because I feel like there's this, people are like policing the internet now too in a way that doesn't feel that constructive. I don't know if you've seen that at all, but it's like you didn't post your black square correctly, or you know, like your hashtag is wrong. And I understand that like there is maybe some value to that one, but other stuff is just like people are trying to be supportive and like, you know, learning how to do that.
Yeah. So it's just crazy how there's all these things happening at the same time. You have the pandemic, you have, I mean, how many moments in history has there been a protest in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, and New York, and every city, and all these small towns? I mean, that is crazy.
And 18 other countries.
Right. And I was trying to think, I heard this other list of like historic things happening. I mean, just, you know, an election year, a massive election year that really feels so massive to everyone. And there was one other element of history that someone was saying that was kind of, and basically a Great Depression, right?
Mm.
Like something or something like that, something of that scale, potentially, that kind of economic thing. And all of this is happening at once. Like, what a time, you know?
Yeah. Well, I asked a question in our group text the other day. That's something I've been thinking about, is like where we grew up. And I'm juxtaposing this with where I am now living. And it's funny because none of us live there anymore. Like out of however, like the 15 of us that are like close friends, or however many it is, 12 or 13, 0 of us live in this town at this point. We've all moved. But I feel pretty grateful that I grew up in this place. And it's only, retrospectively, because of how like rich and diverse it is. And I feel like we are really lucky having that and growing up around that. And I've just been thinking about that a lot, because if I had grown up around here, I wouldn't have had that.
Yeah. Well, and it was actually like not, we wouldn't have had to go too far to find a less diverse place too. Like, I remember going with our friend Nick, who's Black, on a camping trip one time, and somebody made a racist comment to him that I just was completely like floored that it even happened. And it was just like an hour from where we lived, and I was just like, wow, I feel like I'm in a different world. Like, I just can't imagine this happening in our town, because it was a diverse town and there were just people of, it's amazing, our town has Trenton on one side and Princeton on the other side. So, kind of a lot of poverty and a lot of wealth. And if you were to drive from one side to the other in a 20-minute drive, you're just in this completely different place, and so our public high school would just have people from that whole spectrum, like people living on the wealthier side of town but still going to public school, people whose families were in poverty, people of different races, immigrants.
I feel like we had an over representation, and we didn't know it.
Yeah. And there's also just a diversity of experiences where we grew up too, like close to New York and Philadelphia, close to the Appalachian Mountains, close to the beach, close to, like, there was just a lot there for us,
Yeah. I think we're pretty lucky because, we grew up to be, I mean, who knows how we would be otherwise? Maybe we'd be the exact same people, but I feel like we're all like pretty rich with experience and pretty interesting and tolerant people, open-minded.
Yeah. Well, and part of that's also just because we were able to find each other, and we all just want to be around. I mean, there are assholes in our school, right?
We had a lot of problems, but racism wasn't really one of them.
Well, but would you go that far though? I mean, if you asked the Black students that we went to high school with, do you think they would agree with that?
No, I'm not saying it wasn't present. I'm just saying it, like, compared to other places I think in our school, we really had if anything, there was tension around like social class and poverty, which is not completely independent of race, but like, I feel like that was more of a source of.
Yeah. I genuinely, I mean, one of the things I've learned throughout all this is to be humble about the experience that Black people have versus us. So like, I would actually genuinely be curious, like what Nick or someone would say about this if we said, like, do you think our high school had significant problems with racism? Like, I probably should know what they would say. That's actually an indication that maybe we didn't talk about it enough, because I don't know. Honestly don't know. His answer might totally surprise me, and I just never asked him, about his experience.
Yeah. And I mean, that speaks to our privilege, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also, I mean, one of the person I spent the most time with in high school was a Black person, like pretty much. So, I mean, that is also different than a lot of people that look like us and their experience. So, I mean, I'm happy about that. Like, I didn't care. It wasn't a thing at the time, but now I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful that I've had this experience and not some other one where I wasn't encountering people that didn't look like me.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was a great place in a lot of ways, even though we complained about it and it was a crappy place in a lot of ways too.
You have to complain about it.
Yeah, that's right. Because you're a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so here's one way we could transition to the pandemic. I'm genuinely curious what you think about, because obviously, we've talked a lot on the text thread about the potential second wave. And do you hear the thunder in the background, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting hit pretty hard here in DC. I mean, and I've read a couple things along the lines of like, oh my God, are we going to have all this spread from these protests, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are gathering together in large groups every night. This seems like this could be bad,
Yeah, and I mean, that speaks to how priorities have changed, obviously, but also, yeah, these events could be what they call the super spreader events, which anytime I hear that, I just think of Super Shredder from Ninja Turtles. But they could be super shredder events, and like the second wave seems inevitable to me.
Yeah, no, it's like logical, right? Like, how could you, if once you let people out, you're going to get more cases. That just like, you can't argue that fact.
Right. And I mean, where I was, people were pretty distant. Everybody was wearing a mask. I wore a mask the whole time. I didn't touch anyone, and I had hand sanitizer and stuff. But so I think those things work. I think there's evidence to show that those things do work. But at the same time, this is the first time I've been in public in like 3 months. So who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if you're biologically, let's say you have a super spreader and they're wearing a cloth mask, is that going to matter if they're really shedding a lot of virus?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, the only way you can get this virus is person to person. I mean, maybe there are rare cases of like the dog thing that we were talking about or whatever, but like,
yeah, or a surface maybe in rare cases. Yeah.
In rare cases, but for the most part, it's like you need to be in somebody's proximity for a decent amount of time, and you need to like breathe in their breath. Essentially,
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way this works. So everyone's outside, which is a big factor. There are cloth masks. Like there still has to be this transfer, and I feel like that is blocked. Like there's nobody that's like spitting 20 feet, like those people, those aren't real things. Like it still is a matter of like being in close proximity to somebody, and the odds are still pretty low. I feel like the odds that you are in close proximity long enough and that person is contagious at that moment, it's still pretty low.
Right.
I think.
And the fact that you're outside would mean that one person would have trouble spreading it to like many people in the same night or something like that.
It just it definitely decreases the likelihood.
Yeah.
I don't know of any indoor protests at the moment, but
well, there was one story in DC. So the night I saw someone call it like the Battle of Lafayette Square or something like that. That's the name of the square in front of the White House. The night that they cleared H Street and then Trump walked out to take a picture in front of the church. That night, the protesters in DC, this doesn't seem to have happened. That was 3 nights ago as we're speaking right now. This doesn't seem to have happened on the next 2 nights after that. or at least one night after that. Anyway, the law enforcement was really moving the protesters, like driving them like block by block, I guess foot by foot, away from the White House, to the point where they actually reached a residential neighborhood that's like, I don't know exactly, it got to be like a half mile away. Like I was like, wow, they were that far north of the White House. Like, I can't believe police and riders were this close. So what happened was, so they were pushing them up like one through street and then onto a side street that is not a through street. And then the protesters were surrounded on both sides by law enforcement, like in a line like this. And so people who lived on this street just started letting protesters into their house, because the protesters were like, I mean, in a lot of other spots around the city, what happened is, in an orderly fashion, the law enforcement officials arrested the protesters one by one. I don't think they were gonna shoot at them or something. It was just like they had them surrounded basically. So, but they're residential houses. So, this guy, one guy in particular who was on NPR, opened his door and like he was like, there had to be 100 people in my house, like his little like 2-story row house, which is a heroic act by him, obviously, and great, and it's like understandable situation. But I just wonder, like, was everyone in that house wearing a mask? You know what I mean? And they were there like all night.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because that's the part I haven't read that I don't understand. I saw something on Twitter that suggested police were like trying to pull them out of the house, but I don't know if that was true. The person who tweeted that seemed to be standing pretty far away. Yeah, I don't know. I think basically they all just either were kept in there because the law enforcement was like kind of ready at the door to arrest them, or they just were too scared to go out, so decided to stay in there of their own volition or something like that. Although that would be maybe the less likely, because why would you do that if you didn't have to? And then once the curfew was over at 6 a.m., they all left. So they all stayed the whole night, like packed in like sardines. Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that. Well, that doesn't seem ideal. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. But that's unusual. Yeah.
I have a question for you that I just thought of. All right, you're a blue check mark guy on Twitter.
I am.
Tell me, like, how in the past maybe few weeks or months or even the past couple of days, like how does Twitter play a role as opposed to like regular news outlets? And like how's that changed? Because I'm kind of just starting to use Twitter during this like quarantine, because I never gave a shit about news really before this quarantine. So I'm curious, like, what you have to say about that.
When you say how does Twitter play a role, what do you mean?
What is the role of Twitter? Like, how it seems like that is, because you just alluded to it. You said, it seems like when you guys share tweets, they're not from like politicians or even always like, they're just like random people. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. I mean, so on one level, it's incredible because it allows anyone to publish to the world, and lots of internet platforms do that, but Twitter is kind of more built for like people to just quickly publish things than other platforms, I feel like, and it's, for whatever reason, just the way that it's designed and the way that it functions. When you have an event that's unfolding kind of second by second in real time, I'm just not aware of anything else that is able to capture it like Twitter can. It's just so that's incredible that like people can sort of become their own one person news agency in a moment like that, right? And just like show the world what's going on. And Twitter also bought Periscope, which is like you can just kind of start live streaming. So that's on one level great. On another level is potentially could have negative consequences if the information isn't good, but like seems like it is. So that's why I was saying this, you know, this video that I saw, the person posted it with a claim, right? They had a video of cops outside the house, and they were saying, and the tweet said, cops are trying to pull people out of the house. And, you know, it wasn't clear from the picture that was what was happening. And
it was just an image.
It might have been a video, I forget, but it was kind of far away. Like it was like a half a block away or so. So it was a little hard to tell what was going on. So that it may have been true, it may have not been. And so you have to like make sure that you don't necessarily take it as true fact in the way that and like as a reporter, we have a lot of training around like how to use Twitter, and like we have sort of protocols that like sometimes we'll even say, because accounts get hacked and taken over, so you think someone's saying something and it's not them. You know, like the head of Twitter's account got taken over and he started posting all this racist stuff, and people were like, what's going on? And it was like a hacker just acting like it was him. So sometimes when you write it in a story, you say like, according to a tweet posted to this person's account, as opposed to like this person said on Twitter. But then certain people, you know, generally if they have a blue check mark, the account's been verified to actually be them, so you can feel pretty confident that that they're the one writing it. Anyway, so there's definitely potential for disinformation. The other negative aspect of it is like a lot of social media, the more extreme stuff tends to get shared more. So you could put in, as I've been doing, hashtag DC protests, as searching that just to see the tweets that have that hashtag and like see what's going on. But of course, you know, the tweets that are getting the most retweets and likes are often the ones where there's like a confrontation or and so, you know, I forget which night it was. One of the nights I was like, man, it seems like bad out there. And then most of the actual kind of mainstream news coverage I read were like, oh, it was pretty peaceful. But like for some reason Twitter made me feel like all this angst and rage, you know, like not that like the angst and rage was coming at me, right? Like the more extreme emotions. So yeah. And then there literally are like just people who this is what Russia did in 2016. Like there are armies of bots that post and promote false information that work together to create momentum for false information on Twitter, which also happens on other platforms too.
Yeah. So before the protests started, what were you using Twitter for? Like, how was it factoring into your like work around the pandemic, or just maybe your curiosity around it?
I use it the way I use a lot of social media, which is I tend to not go, I don't generally just like open the app. What often happens is someone will send me a link to a tweet and then I'll open the app. And then sometimes like an hour later, I'm like, oh man, what just happened? You know, I find Twitter very addictive, especially after like 9 or 10 p.m. Like my mind loses all ability to like look away. For some reason, I've lost my defenses at that point.
Did you find it useful for pandemic related stuff?
I find it useful this is why I like our text thread, because people who kind of have more curated feeds will send me links to tweets and then I'll read them. But I don't take the time to find people to follow that are good sources of information. I generally just like, you know, pass it. Like Ben probably has people he started following for coronavirus pandemic information because he's like curating his feed to an extent that I don't really do. Like I follow a lot of random people that I probably don't need to because I just forgot that I even clicked it, you know?
Yeah. Well, you also have our group chat, which is its own feed in itself of curated information.
Right. So I consume it kind of passively, like once in a while. Someone else described Twitter to me once. I think this is a good description. It's when you're on Twitter, it's like drinking from a fire hose, because it's just like all these, everything's just so rapid fire and there's so much. And so you never like see every tweet. You kind of like, you just go and you like drink for a bit and then you're done, and you don't ever have like a full picture of what's going on, and you never read your whole feed. So yeah.
Okay. Now that I'm feeling like we've gotten moving a little bit, at least my mind, we could talk about like how, like, what is your work like? So you're a reporter, but like you guys are still not at the office, right?
Yep. Haven't been at the office since the early to mid-March. And that's true for basically everyone at my company, which is like hundreds and hundreds of journalists all over the world. And working from home, I have a desk set up near my front door. So it's like kind of it used to be just kind of a dead space with plants and shoes and stuff. And now it's like my little space. So that's good to have kind of a separate area where I can go and work. My wife already worked from home, so not a big deal for her. And we've got this rhythm down where we are taking care of our son, who's like, going to be 2 this summer. Like kind of, I'll take him for a couple hours. She'll take him for a couple hours, and we have like a schedule throughout the day so that we can each get our work done. And it's definitely hard to like be as productive with that as I once was. Without, if I need to be productive, I end up having to work at night after he goes to bed, which kind of sucks. But yeah, what can you do? I mean, I'm also until recently, I was on a coverage area that was like a little bit quieter than it was before the pandemic, but then they transferred me to cover the Paycheck protection program. So I've actually been busier the last couple of weeks.
I'm sure people have a lot of questions about that. I know I did. I feel like I kind of have somewhat of a grasp on it because you got that loan and use it.
Yeah, I feel like we're moving into the phase of it where it is not so much a question of, I need the money. Like most people people seem to have gotten the money if they applied for it at this point. And maybe the next stage is now, how do you get it? How do you get the loan forgiven? People are trying to figure that out and filling out that application. And then, the thing that we're thinking about from a news perspective is, did it work? Is this actually helpful? Did the money get where it needs to go? And if not, like, why not? And what policies, like should the kind of putting it to government, like sort of once we find out why it didn't work, go to the government officials and say, well, what are you going to do about the fact that all these restaurants can't really use this,
So was the intention to give people this loan so that they could keep their staff on payroll?
Yes.
But you're finding, this is what I've noticed anyway, and you could tell me if you've seen the same thing, is that people that stopped working because of the pandemic were making generally more money on unemployment because of the CARES Act. So the employees didn't want to be on payroll for that amount of time because they would be taking a hit, which is kind of crazy. So it's kind of like backfiring, and I think people are trying to figure out how to like maybe rehire or figure out how to work around it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's far from perfect. It definitely helped some businesses. You can't deny that. I mean, I think it's now 4.4 million different businesses got loans. So, it'd be ridiculous to say like none of them were helped. Obviously, a lot of them needed money and got money. So we should stipulate that. That being said, there were a lot of things that weren't perfect about it. So number one, it didn't get out, and maybe this was never going to be possible, but it was too late for a lot of people. Like if you if you closed on March 15th, the loan applications opened, I think, on April 3rd. So that's like a good 2.5 weeks. And that's when the loan applications open, not even when you got the money. So like by the time a lot of people got the money, they had fired their staff or like their staff were already on unemployment. So the whole idea was get the businesses money so that they can keep their staff on. But, you know, if you've already laid off your staff, you're in a totally different situation than if you haven't yet. So
and if you
that was an issue. What?
And the loan very specifically states you have to use a certain percentage for your payroll in order for it to be forgiven.
Yes, exactly. It was 75. They just lowered it to 60 today or yesterday. So there was that problem. So then the question was like, well, people were like, okay, fine, yeah, but once the businesses get the money, because we're going to make them have to pay it out to get the loan forgiven. The hope was that businesses would hire their workers back. But as you're saying, the thing that it all happened so quickly that two parts of the emergency legislative package were at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. There was this program, and then they also boosted unemployment benefits. And I think they even knew this was going to happen, but they were just like, we have to do something. We can't take the time to fix this. We'll fix it later. And they never really fixed it. So now you have a situation where like your employee is making more on unemployment. So unless you want to like screw over your own employee, you're not going to make them come back to work.
But you can give them a raise. You can match it, but then you're in a different problem.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure though whether you can. I think the rules for getting the loan forgiven you might run into an issue with that, because they wanted to prevent people from just abusing the system by like just. So let's say you hired your sister and you gave her a huge raise, and then the government reimbursed you for that because you got the loan forgiven, and then you know what I mean, like that could be abused. So I think there's a rule that says you can't pay them substantially more than they used to be making, you know what I mean, like you can't. But actually I'm not 100% sure about that, so I probably shouldn't speak so definitively, but I think there's rules around that.
Well, yeah, you
probably. And then
know.
There's another so. But that kind of represents another issue with it, which is there are a lot of rules and there are a lot of strings attached to the money. There's only certain things you can spend it on. For someone like your wife or whoever who doesn't necessarily have a lawyer or an accountant that works for their business, it can be a pretty difficult thing to figure out. And there are people who have said, I was just talking to a guy the other day who worked at like a sort of economic think tank, who was saying, look, if the goal was to just keep the economy going, there shouldn't have been strings attached with this money. Like, yes, there would have been a lot of fraud and waste if you just say, here's a bunch of money, give it to a lot of small businesses. But, there's probably a lot of fraud and waste anyway. And his argument was like, the right thing to do would have been to say, we don't care. Some people might misuse this, but it doesn't matter. It's going to help enough people if we just get it out and let them spend it how they want it,
Anyway, I want to ask you, because you brought this up in our text, but how do I want to word it? Okay, so you probably know just from things that I've said that I often have an issue with how, especially science is presented in the media. And like that has obviously been a big part of coverage of the pandemic. And I'm curious, like how, I don't know necessarily the right question to ask, but like, how do you think the media has done? Or like, do you think it's been helpful, or there's also been a lot of shit coming out because different agendas are being pushed, and I'm just curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I read enough and watch enough to make a broad statement about to be like a media critic. You know, I would say I have like my own observations, but I don't consider them to hold necessarily generally. But you know,
Mhm.
just because I think about this stuff, uh, I can say a couple things. So first of all, uh, being a reporter is difficult. It's great, but one of the things that makes it difficult is you're often dealing with issues that you're not trained in and educated in, because you're educated as a journalist, and that is like a specific set of skills. One of those skills is being able to very quickly understand something very complex and write a story that is accurate, sometimes in an hour, sometimes in 20 minutes. And, you know, certain reporters may have a lot of experience with the topic, but you also, without realizing it, may be reading an article where the reporter doesn't have a lot of experience. And just because somebody was on vacation that day or they are on a new assignment, like, you know, with the coronavirus, a lot of people, a lot of a lot more journalists are covering like science and health than were before, and certainly like some percentage of them hadn't really covered that before, so they're learning as they go. um, and so you know you're gonna it's it's a it's a hard thing to do, to sort of you really almost, because of that, because like my worst day on the job is writing something that's wrong. Like I don't want to have to do a correction, because our business is built on trust of the information that we're giving. So, and if I have too many corrections, like I'm going to lose my job eventually. You know, like it's important for what we write to be accurate. So, uh, because of that, I'm going to be conservative a lot of times, um, and that may, with someone that may mean that what I write is like kind of very general, or uh, maybe a little lacking in nuance, or like when I understand a topic better personally, I can lean into it a little more, right? Like I can be like, you know, this person said this, but I'm going to add another factor to point out that, you know, there are some things about this claim that people should think about also. But if I don't have that context because I'm new to it, then I don't know to put that in there, A, and B, this person I'm interviewing, uh, that's another thing. Like you don't necessarily know who the experts are when you're new. So you're like, someone's a professor from such and such, like that sounds pretty good. You know, I don't, how am I supposed to like evaluate whether he's a reputable person, especially on the fly on deadline? So it's situation by situation. I guess the general thought is like, I'm not asking for people to hold us to a lower standard. I'm just saying you have to be kind of understanding that journalists are human beings and they're not all going to be scientists, and like the role that we play is translating is a certain role that like scientists don't play, and our role is needed too. It's not, it's like part of the ecosystem of how people are hearing about this stuff. I do think there are some just criticism that like with 2020 hindsight, I feel like the coverage has been a little bit like, what's the right word for it, like the word that's coming to my mind is sensationalist. I don't know if that's fair, but
I think what about excitable?
yeah, that's a good one. That's good. Like you've helped me understand, just because you've studied public health, how scientists kind of think about science, and what I guess we've all, like as we read, been learning more about what you need to feel good about something being an effective treatment, or something to feel strong, to feel confident about something being a risky activity, or the characteristic of the disease, or you know. And there's been a lot of information flying. Well, like maybe it's this, maybe this is bad, maybe like it lives on surfaces for 7 days. Like I remember reading a story about that and getting totally freaked out a month ago. And was that like the reporter who wrote that story's fault? I'm not sure. I think they were probably just reading the study and presenting the study. But
Well,
you know, it's like, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's the thing is like, I don't think in a case like that, I don't think the reporter did anything wrong. It's just that people are looking for anything to latch onto. And I think that you need, when writing these words, like, especially in science, people can take the right information and draw the complete wrong conclusions. And that is something that I've seen a lot during this pandemic, especially on social media. Just like people will look for anything to support what they already think,
Mm,
just like a confirmation bias sort of a thing. And
mm,
so if people are terrified and you say, oh, this virus can survive on a surface for 7 days, then they're going to say like, oh, I can't touch anything for the rest of my life until this thing is gone.
right.
Or the same people can be like, well, it lives on everything. Like, what the fuck? Like, let's go live our lives. Like, so you take the same information and have a completely different idea of what it means.
Mm,
And a scientist, there needs to be more given. It lives on a surface, but that doesn't mean if you have one virus particle that's on a table, you can take it and like put it in your mouth and you're still not going to get sick. You need like 1 million virus particles. And so it doesn't mean it's viable. It doesn't mean it's
mhm,
infectious.
mhm.
So like there's just not enough there. And I've seen that happen a lot during this crisis.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair criticism. Like, if you can't write a story that gives enough context for someone to interpret the study, and it's just sort of, uh, you know, and an expert would read that story and then feel like this is scaring people unnecessarily, then that's a legitimate criticism. I think, like, we need to think about the effect of just like putting something out there without context, even though there's often a deadline and the story just came out and it seems really important. And so, that's where experience is helpful. And, unfortunately, not everyone can just get experience. Like, it takes time, right? I mean, I heard a guy on, again, you can tell I've been listening to NPR a lot. My morning routine is putting on NPR. And there was a guy this morning. Did you see the study about hydroxychloroquine? Is that how you say it? That came out this morning.
Yes.
Uh, the one from like Minnesota or wherever it was.
Mhm.
And uh, so it was actually really interesting. The headlines I had seen about it made it seem one way. I'm trying to remember. Made it seem like basically the study had shown that this drug, like everything you thought about it working, was wrong. Like that was kind of my impression. Like, study says this drug doesn't work and sucks. From the headline, that's what I got. And then when I heard the reporter explain it, it was very clear that he really knew his stuff, and he did not sort of interpret the study by like adding on things. He was just sort of, he explained what the experiment was that they did. He explained the parameters of the experiment and how many people. He explained what they were looking for, which was which was a specific thing, obviously, which was whether the drug prevents the disease, not necessarily whether it makes you feel better if you already have the disease, but whether it prevents, and who the subjects were. It was just a very like matter of fact presentation of, this is what these researchers did, and this is what they found, and this is why, and that was it. Like, it wasn't, and therefore broad conclusion for all of society. Like, he never said that. He just said, this is what this specific thing was that came out today. And
Well,
I thought it was a very effective, like, helpful way of characterizing it.
yeah. Well, that's what science articles are. Like, that's what
Yeah.
journal articles are. They're specific to their study, and they have what's called internal validity usually. So like it works with this sample, and under these parameters, these are our methods, and these are the results, and this is what we conclude in this context. And then there's the concept of external validity in science, like, and it's hard to make that jump a lot of times because, and that it's basically asking like, okay, this works in here, but does it work in the real world?
Mhm.
And you need a lot of information to be able to make that claim, right? Like I used to work in a tissue lab, where I would infect human cells on a dish. It was a cancer lab, so I'd infect them with viruses. I'd do dose responses with different drugs and experiments like that. And these are cells in a plate, and it's like, okay, well, this experiment worked. That doesn't mean anything about the context of like the human body. It doesn't mean nothing, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work just because it worked here. Like it's a totally different world. But like a lot of people, depending on how it's written or presented or what they already think, they're going to be like, oh, look, like this happened. Like, so that means like, drink bleach, right?
Right. And there's as a journalist, there's all these sort of decision points along the way. So like one decision point is how do you kind of write that? What does the headline say? And that's always hard because you gotta want to interest people. You want people to read it. On the other hand, you don't want to like write checks you can't cash or make it seem like it's a bigger deal than it actually is. So those two goals are at odds sometimes, right? Making it interesting, but also making it like sober is not always like sometimes those are going in two different directions, right?
Well, I guess when you're publishing to a scientific journal, you kind of know your audience, and everybody's
Right.
meeting you at like a certain level of experience or knowledge. Whereas like, you don't necessarily know, your audience is not all scientists or all anything.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. And so that's what we do. That's the role we play, is like translating that to the general public, right? So our audience is, I guess the Wall Street Journal's audience is different than other news organizations, but I try to think about like, would my mom understand this? I generally picture the reader as being like an educated, intelligent person who can make their own decisions and doesn't need me to do that for them. And so you just present the fact. But anyway, so there's the headline, then there's like the order of the story and the information, and how do you do that? What do you choose to highlight at the beginning? And sometimes you're in this situation where you're like, okay, I have this story, like I think I have news. If I write this, there's going to be like a certain segment of the people that read it that are going to conclude something that I'm not sure they should, but because they already believe something that they believe, they're not going to read the whole story. Like I could write three really good paragraphs about here's all this context and why. Like I'm never going to tell someone this is what you should conclude, but like I guess one example is, so I cover the government. Sometimes you'll hear about the government, hear that the government might do something, and that's news. That the action is under consideration, because if they did it, it would be a big deal. And then you write here that says, this government agency is considering this regulation of this industry, and then, they might never do it, and yet, like sometimes I feel like people will read that story and say like, oh yeah, like I heard that the Federal Trade Commission is going to like make this thing, like totally ban this thing, and they just like assume it's going to happen. They don't hear the part about this is only maybe going to happen, and it might not happen. Like they kind of just remember that it. You see what I mean? And that, it's fair because people are reading hundreds of things a day and they don't have time to read every story. So it's not anything like wrong with that on the part of the reader, but so I'm just saying, like from the perspective of the reporter, sometimes no matter how much context you give, it almost doesn't matter because people are going to take a certain thing. So then that leads you to another decision, which is like, do I write this story at all? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, like, is this something that we should be giving attention to, regardless of whether, like, that's sometimes as important as what does the headline say, or because once you've made the decision to write it, you're giving it life, you're giving it attention, and you have to always think about like, is that the right decision too? You know, is this study important enough to even write about? Like you could write about, oh, there's this study that says this thing, but it's probably not a big deal. You know, but should you even write that story? Because people,
we got a cat. Sorry.
yeah,
Um,
because people
Yeah.
may take that study as gospel when they shouldn't. Yeah.
do you ever
Uh,
have you? Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you had ever backed out, but I like backed out of an article, like an idea you were going to write, and then decided not to.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, we do that a lot. We like think we have something interesting, and then it's like this. It's just not a story here.
Gotcha.
And it all. That's a very like subjective decision that you kind of, there's not a lot of science in like deciding things like how to write a headline and how to write the first sentence. And writing isn't like that. Writing is very there's always more than one way to do it, and you just kind of have to make your call based on the best information that you have.
Well, I see that, and I appreciate you lending me some insight, because I get it. I know it's
Yeah.
not easy to do, but like just coming from where I'm coming from, sometimes I'm just like frustrated when I see things that are
Well, yeah,
wrong.
you're not alone. Like I write about, so I've written about financial regulation. Lately, I've been writing about technology and telecommunications. And so people who are experts will sometimes email me and just like call me an idiot. They're like, and they're not even wrong. It's like, hey, like I think a lot of people feel that way when they read news articles about things that they really know really well, and they're like, yeah, you're forgetting about this whole other thing. But like, as the reporter who's been on the beat for a year, I might not have heard about that. So I actually want to get that email, because now, you're helping me like get better, right? I always welcome that criticism.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you forever. I do want to ask you, so like, just in general, how do you feel in Washington, D.C. these days, just with everything that's going on? Like, what's your general like anxiety?
I mean, I like living here. I like my job a lot, and my job is here. So I'm generally happy. We live in a safe neighborhood. We haven't seen a lot of action in terms of the last week with the protests. We live kind of near the Capitol, but like most of the action has been around the White House, which is not really that close to us. So yeah, I mean, it's journalism can be weird in that when there's crazy things going on, like sometimes those things are concerning or bad as a citizen, like, but as a journalist they're actually very interesting. Like there's this perverse thing about the job where like when crazy shit is happening, it actually like you become more busy at work, and in some ways that means your work is like fascinating because historic things are happening, but they're not like always good things. Like this pandemic is horrible and people are losing their jobs, like, and that makes my work more interesting, which is like kind of fucked up but also true.
Okay, rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
Given the protesting that's going on, given the pandemic, I've never asked it this way before, but okay, scale 1 to 10, you walk out your front door, how like anxious do you feel?
That's a good question. I don't really feel that anxious. Maybe a 3.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I had another rapid fire. Let's see if I can remember it rapidly. It's not coming to me. Forget. Yeah, I don't know. It's too rapid fire. Okay. Well, that's cool. Anything else that you want to cover?
I don't think so. I feel like I rambled a lot about journalism.
That's good.
Yeah.
We don't have that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
no, I would just say, like, no matter what I said, I'm trying to be kind of humble about the job that we have. And I know a lot of people are kind of frustrated with the media right now, and I guess I would just add that I understand that, and I hope people don't. If I said something that sounds like I'm dismissing that concern, or I'm telling people they don't know what they're talking about, I don't. That's not true.
I don't think you did, and also you don't
Good.
represent all of the media.
No, I know, but it sometimes it feels that way when people get mad at reporters a lot, which is fair.
I don't get mad at you because you're a reporter. I just get mad at you for other stuff.
Other stuff.
No, I don't think I've ever been really mad at you, so that's nice.
Yeah, there's not a lot of anger in our crew, which is good.
Do you remember the first time that you and I ever hung out, like one-on-one?
Oh, the first time?
I don't know that I do, but I'm asking you.
I don't know, man. Let me think about that. I'm trying to even remember like the earliest time. I do not have a great memory.
Okay, I'll tell you.
I have a very like sort of deep but not broad memory, if that makes sense. So like certain events I remember in a lot of detail, but I don't remember a lot of events from that time in our lives.
All right, here's how I would like to end this podcast. Just throw out everything that's going on in the world. What is your favorite memory of me and you and maybe other people? Or any one that you can think of that you like.
Well, since your T-shirt is referencing the Disney trip, that's definitely a great memory. Senior year, going to Disney World with all the high school friends, and you created a character, a sort of comedic character that we were prank calling people with, which was good times. I'm sure we that some of the humor that was being used maybe wouldn't fly in the modern age, which is probably a good thing, but that wouldn't be unique to us, certainly.
Prank calls were a big deal back in the day.
Yeah. So that's a pretty awesome memory. That's definitely among like the hardest I've ever laughed in my life, for sure. Yeah.
I've got one that hopefully you'll be fine with me sharing.
Me too. I hope.
Okay. Well, I think you will, but you can tell me if it's not. And I've recounted this to you before, and it's so funny to me. One time, I came to visit you in college at Penn, and I would come to visit a lot because it was a pretty short drive, and we'd go to like parties and stuff. And we used to walk to that Wawa at 38th and 38th and Walnut.
Spruce.
Fuck, how do I not know it? 38th and Spruce. Yeah. Yes, I'm cutting that out. 38th and Spruce, that Wawa. No, I lived in Philly for only 10 years.
Yeah, but like that's like the college kids Wawa. You didn't.
I went there occasionally.
Yeah.
So we'd walk there like pretty much every night that I was in town with you guys. And one night, we were walking up the street, up Spruce, like from wherever your house was, and I said something like, I don't have a very good sense of smell. I've always had a really bad sense of smell, and to this day, I have a terrible, terrible sense of smell. And someone said something about like a fart, and I was like, I don't know what it smells like. I've never smelled a fart. I just like I don't have a good sense of smell. And you did the classic Ryan move where we're walking and you stop to like contemplate what was just said. Like you could no longer move. You had to stop to think about this. And you turn to me and you go, "It smells like poop."
That's great.
It was so funny.
I haven't heard that one. I don't know if I've ever heard that memory from you. That's fantastic.
Oh yeah, it makes me laugh every time.
Also, I would say that again. I stand I stand by that statement.
Why would you think that I know what poop smells like? Like,
Yeah, that's fair. Wait, so you also don't know what poop smells like?
no, not really. Like, I don't have good idea.
I'm confused. So do you not like when you said that you don't have a great sense of smell? I thought you meant that it would just be if there was an odor, but it wasn't like particularly strong, you wouldn't be able to detect that odor. But if you like tried, you could. You know what I mean? Is that what it is? Like,
Maybe, but
because in
here's the
that case,
thing.
you should be able to smell a really strong fart. You
I've
wouldn't
never
need-
smelled a fart, but I've also never like put my face next to like feces. So
Yeah. Well, if you ever have a kid, you can have that pleasure.
are you fine with me sharing that story?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm proud of it. I'm proud of that statement.
You said nothing wrong. You said everything right, I think. All right. Well, thanks so much, Ryan. This was great. This was nice to kind of take my mind off of stuff and just talk for a little bit.
Yeah, me too, man. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. All right. Thank you so much.
All right, buddy.
Have a good night.
Night.
Spent too much time in California. Now I'm in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.